Hi, everyone, and welcome to this session where we're going to be talking about IEPs, assessments, and advocacy, especially for children who have dyspraxia and DCD. I especially want to recognize the organization that put this together, DCD Dyspraxia. You can literally go to dcddyspraxia.com and check out all the great work they're doing. And so I encourage you guys to reach out to them, to connect with them, follow them on social media and make sure that you get and stay connected because it makes a lot of what I'm going to talk about today so much easier when you have a community behind you to support you. Okay. So before we get started, just a little background on me. So my name is Stacy Hoagland. I have been an educational advocate for about 25 years with an organization called Family Network on Disabilities of Broward County. So Broward County is down in Southeast Florida, the Fort Lauderdale area for those from the outside. I am the coordinator of the Florida Partners in Policymaking program. And the Partners program is across the nation and even in other countries. It really teaches parents of children, young children, adult children with developmental disabilities about how to advocate, not at IEP meetings though, more of systems change. And as I get into this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about why that's necessary for the kids that we're talking about right now. And it also is for self-advocates, so people with developmental disabilities who need to become better advocates. But that program is all about systems change. So it's writing policies, knowing how to influence policymakers and such. I'm also the president of the Autism Society of Florida and very involved with our national organization. But anyway, so for the sake of today, we're going to be specifically focusing on children who have dyspraxia in our school systems and how they go sometimes completely unrecognized, unidentified, and why that happens, and what are some of the things that you can do to help get you onto the next step or the next pathway in making sure that they have what they need in school. Okay. All right. So let me share my screen. Alrighty. So, like I said before, we're going to be talking about IEP's assessment and advocacy and why it's so important. So, a lot of the information that we're talking about here on this page, and I know it's a lot of words, and I hate PowerPoint presentations that have a lot of words, so I do apologize. But I wanted to make sure that you guys knew exactly, some of the things that we're talking about that are some of the challenges with kids who have dyspraxia or DCD, so developmental coordination disorder. And I think that we have many more children who really struggle with these needs that are unidentified or underidentified, meaning maybe they're being identified as something else because people just don't have enough information about it. So much of this stuff you're going to already know because you already have a kid who's been identified and you're just not sure what to do with it. So just bear with me for a minute for those who maybe don't really know what it is. So fine motor skill issues such as difficulty with typing, writing, fastening clothes, so it could be buttons, zippers, snaps, those little catchy things that we have on some of our pants, really just being able to use your hands to make what's called a pincer grasp to be able to do really fine motor little things. Gross motor skill issues like poor balance, clumsiness, tendency to trip, or eye-hand coordination. So the kid that's out at recess who, can't really play ball because they end up getting hit with the ball because their reflexes are too slow, or they just can't kind of get them, their reflex and their coordination sort of together. The kid who trips over backpacks in the classroom because the backpacks are on the floor and they don't really walk around obstacles in their path. Speech and language issues like uncontrolled pitch, rate, repetitive speech, not having established hand dominance or using right and left interchangeably. So the kid, sometimes people will say, well, look, they're ambidextrous. But so, meaning that they can use both their hands, but sometimes they're really not very proficient with either of their hands. It's like they're trying to figure out which one is my dominant hand. I'm not really sure. Eye tracking difficulties and a tendency to lose their place when they're reading. In that particular area, they oftentimes will get identified with dyslexia because it may be reported that they feel like words or letters are moving around on the page, that they see things a little bit differently. Maybe they see and they process differently. Now, you guys know that it's not even if it was dyslexia, the issue is not in the eyes. It's in the talking to the brain and the processing, right? It's the brain and the eyes talking, processing the information that's coming into the eyes. So it's not that they necessarily see a word backwards with here, their vision, but it's the whole transfer in the brain and how it teases out and extrapolates information. And then when they spit out, sometimes is backwards. So, but it has to do with the whole processing piece. And if we don't address processing and recognize how a student processes information, that's when we spend years working with a kid on a certain issue and it's not making a difference because we're not really getting to the underlying concern. Okay. Like putting glasses on a kid. It's good if they need glasses, but is it going to address the processing? Not usually. So perception difficulties such as oversensitivity, undersensitivity to touch, taste, temperature, pain, oversensitivity to light, poor understanding of direction, or lack of a sense of time, speed, and weight. There's something called interoception, and there's an author that she wrote a book, something like the eighth sensory system, interoception. Her name is Kelly Mailer. It's a really good book, so you can check that out. It will probably give you some insight into what's going on with my kid. And that is where, let me also add, I have a 29-year-old who has autism. So just like most of you guys, I got into all of this because I had a personal connection. And so I see some of these things in him as well, because it's people who have a impacted sensory system tend to have a challenge with what we call interoception. So that may be not being able to identify when you're full or when you're hungry, when something is hot versus lukewarm, for example, or being able to tell when something is too loud or not. Or like in some kids, it's even when do I feel like I have to go to the bathroom and when do I not? And so just check out her book. Like I said, the eighth sensory system interoception is pretty interesting. Learning and memory issues such as difficulty organizing thoughts, following instructions, and being focused. A lot of times, even medical professionals will say, "Oh, well, that's ADD," and kind of put it over there. Because, like, if you look at this list, including the last one, challenges in behavior and emotional regulation, um, it could, in itself, you've got probably 4 different diagnoses that you could give there. But it's when things are wrapped up together that makes you go, oh my goodness, okay, so what is it with this kid? Some kids with dyspraxia do present as on one end of the autism spectrum, but that doesn't mean that they have autism. So it takes some time. It takes people who know what they're looking at, really, because once a professional knows what they're looking at, it's not too difficult to identify it, but it can be tricky on the front end. And then the last little comment I have there is that teens and adults who live with dyspraxia may also have anxiety, depression, low self-esteem due to the hardships that they suffer with every day. And, that's true for any of us. If we have some type of challenge, let's just say it's vision, and you don't have your glasses, you're going to get kind of frustrated when you can't see when you got to drive, or being in a movie theater and you can't really see the screen so good because you left your glasses at home, right? So a lot of us would get frustrated. So imagine it's not just your glasses, but it's the whole world is more confusing. So imagine just how anxiety provoking that would be, knowing that it doesn't really matter what I do, it's still going to be hard. So just keep that in mind. All right, so Child Find. Child Find was established by the Department of Education. Let me add that, well, because of my age, 1975, well, it was a long time ago, but it was within my lifetime. So I was 10 years old in 1975. And I remember being in school without kids with disabilities because up until 75, they did not even have the right to go to school. Forget about IEPs and all that stuff. So for you guys who don't know, IEP is an individualized education program. So it's like a legal document that makes sure that kids with disabilities get what they need in school. But before then, There was nothing. They could literally tell you, sorry, but because of the needs of your kid, we don't have that. So at that time in history, that's in the United States, that's when a lot of parents and people with disabilities made their voices heard in Washington and were basically enough is enough. This is ridiculous already that our kids don't get to have the education they should. So that's when the law changed. So they brought about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And that is the law that still today governs public education across the country and making sure that students with disabilities receive the services, support, accommodations, everything that they need in order to have the best outcomes. And I'll go over what the focus of that law is in just a minute. But a piece of it is child find. I know it sounds like just something that's sort of obscure. It doesn't really sound like the name of a formal movement or organization. But Child Find is given the responsibility to locate, evaluate, and provide services. So your public school system is required to locate, meaning they have to literally look for kids. So they are charged with looking for children who are in their schools to see who here needs to have something more in IEP, specialized services, and the such. So I realized that today, probably because they're overtaxed, they with a lot of other stuff going on, they generally, I find anyway, they're not really pursuing like it's like they're told to under child find in this law to seek out students who have disabilities, but they are. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is the law, and the law is there to protect you. But if you're just depending upon systems and educators to do the right thing because it's in the law, you will be waiting a long time. You have to know your rights. You have to know how to exercise those rights. And I'm going to talk about that today. So this is to ensure that students with disabilities are provided with the support they need to make progress in the general education curriculum. And I know a lot of people, when they think of special ed, they think of special ed being that class over there down the hall somewhere. And that is not actually what the law is about. Law is to give students everything that they need, which could be that special ed classroom. But the focus is to get them into a regular classroom and how they can make progress with every other typically developing peer in that classroom. The world is not institutionalized. There's no, we don't want, we don't want that. We want our people, no matter who they are, to be working alongside everybody else, doing life along typically developing adults, wherever they choose to when they're adults. And the best pathway to get there is through general education. All right, so these are the eligibility criteria, the categories, when you are getting that evaluation, which I'm going to get to in a minute. But I want you to recognize there's not one there for dyspraxia. Okay, and we'll get into a little bit more of that later, but just so that you see that when a school does the evaluation, it's got to be one of these categories that they're identified as. Okay, so we have autism spectrum, and they're in ABC order. Deaf blindness, developmental delay, emotional behavior disability, hearing impairment, including deafness, intellectual disability. Let me just say on intellectual disability, that's where you're looking at an IQ score. It does vary a bit across the states, but generally speaking, it's between 67 and 69 or lower as an IQ. Those are the kids who get captured there. Orthopedic impairment, kids who have physical need, kids with cerebral palsy, kids who use some type of devices to get around. Other health impairment, I'll talk more about that in a minute. Specific learning disability, so dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, they tend to fall in there. Speech and or language impairment, traumatic brain injury, vision impairment, including blindness. So I highlighted other health impaired because that's where I find kids with dyspraxia, DCD, tend to fall. So do kids with ADD, ADHD. So it's kind of like the catch-all when the school system's not really sure where do we plug them in. They tend to fall in other health impairment. Now for that, to qualify for other health impaired, you do have to have a medical diagnosis. So if you have that from outside of your school system, you'll be able to bring that in. Now, a diagnosis is different than a psychologist who did an evaluation who said, yeah, this looks like whatever. School systems take private information into account. They do not have to take it like to the degree that maybe the private provider thought that they should. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So here's the assessment areas. Okay, so when you have to sign a consent to evaluate. So back at that child find thing. So under child find, you have the right to request to sign a consent to evaluate. So if you have a kid who doesn't have an IEP and you're just trying to figure out, all right, how do I get an IEP? Does my kid need one? Like, what does my kid need? I'm not really even sure. You have the right to request to sign that consent to evaluate. Once you sign it, that's where we start with this assessment information. But let me also add that when you oftentimes we hear RTI, response to intervention. That's been a big buzz phrase for a couple of years now. And so RTI, yes, the school system, when they identify a kid as having, challenges in school, they're required to start this RTI process, which could put your kid on something called a progress monitoring plan. And so let's say it's reading and the student is really struggling with reading. So the school decides, no, we're going to have this student enter the RTI process. So that means there's a group of people who get together and they talk about the kids who are challenges and what they could do. So they'll put this kid under RTI. And basically that just means they're going to give them like an extra little dose of, for a kid who's with the reading issues, a little extra dose of reading support. So the school has to do that, but you do not have to wait for the RTI process to be done before you sign a consent to evaluate. So if you ask the school, I'd like to come in and sign a consent to evaluate because, as you know, I have these concerns for my child. And if they say, well, we're going to have you do that right after RTI, then you say, no, I understand you have to do RTI, but I want to sign the consent to evaluate now. And you could keep doing your RTI, but I want to sign the consent because they only have 60 days to get a consent from time of consent to evaluation, and you're reviewing the evaluation. If you wait, so if they do RTI for 3 months and then they come back to you and they're like, yeah, he's not really making progress. So I think we're going to go ahead and have you sign a consent. You just spent 3 months and it's throw it on the scale. Was it worth it? Was it not? I believe it does not. It is not worth it. So I always say that once there's a concern and you think your child has a disability, you need to start, you're going to sign that consent now. And they could still do the RTI, but they're going to then begin the assessment process at the same time, which I find is best because the one thing that you definitely don't get back, and doesn't matter how old you are, is time. So this is your child. So my recommendation would be that you do not give them time. Okay, so assessment areas. So there's health, vision and hearing, social and emotional, cognition, intellect, so IQ testing, adaptive behavior, academic performance or academic achievement, speech language. AAC is just alternative communication like devices. Communication needs in general, so more speech language communication, and then fine, gross, and sensory motor. The evaluation has to be comprehensive. And I find this is pretty general. I don't usually have a hard time with that. Usually, once a parent signs the consent to evaluate, they do a full psychoeducational evaluation. But if you're finding that that's not happening, then you need to say, where's the comprehensive evaluation? Because that's what it's supposed to be. All right, so here, this is definitely not all of them. These are just the evaluation tools that I happen to like. Now, you may have experience with others that you really like. So, more power to you. These are just the ones that I think you're going to get the best bang for your buck. And before I go into these, let me add that children with disabilities are not great test takers. So when I see a result, I generally speaking will make the assumption that, okay, this may be a pretty good picture, but it's definitely not really who this kid is and what they're able to do. Especially if the school psychologist doesn't spend a decent amount of time in the classroom with the kid getting to know who they are. It's just this woman who comes in and takes me to this other room and does these tests with me. I don't know who she is. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So it can be really confusing, especially to a kid who already has some other challenges. But knowing that these are the ones that I just think do a pretty good job. So the DAS, the differential ability scale. So it really looks at both spatial and nonverbal reasoning clusters. So that's the reason I like it. You could get both a verbal and a nonverbal, which personally speaking, I think we should do for all of kids. I think every kid should get both a nonverbal IQ test and a verbal, because for many kids, the difference is pretty significant. Your kid may be really good with processing and intellectual abilities when the expectation is not that they're going to speak it, their responses, but that they're going to show through what they know in other ways. The WISC, the Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children. So I like that one because it looks at processing speed, perceptual organization. It's got those subtests that I just happen to like. Now, you're not going to do all these, and it's up to the psychologist ultimately to decide. But I always believe in having as much information as you can so that you think about who's my kid? What are they like? And then which one might be best? So the lighter R, I think that one does a pretty good job. It also has both verbal and nonverbal IQ tests. And the Tony, I put the Tony on there. So the test of nonverbal intelligence. My kids who I tend to see this as most effective for are the ones who either don't verbally communicate or are very limited with their verbal communication skills. So generally speaking, those are kids with more global impact of disability. I've seen it used with other kids as well, but it just tends to do a better job on the kids who have more of a, oh, I see your disability. Because with most kids, we don't really see it. You look at a kid, you don't really see it until you really get into having an interaction with them. So academic achievement, those are going to be your Woodcock-Johnson test of academic achievement, Wechsler individual achievement test, and there's a reading rate measure in there. The Kaufman test of educational achievement. So the Wechsler, the reading rate thing, so the fluency. There's a woman, Karen Erickson, that I think is brilliant. And she has a great deal of background in really looking at reading. She was kind of like before her time, because we hear so much these days about the science of reading. And really, Karen's thing was, and still today in much of the literature on it, is really looking to see if a kid doesn't have the ability to what I call word attack. So see a word that they've never seen before and know what the sounds make, the sounds that the letters make, and how to blend them together, and then to develop their fluency. They're really never going to get to a point of understanding what they're reading. Because if you read without being a fluent reader, it's just a bunch of words. It's like reading a word list. And that is useless. So we want to track reading rate. We want to watch it. We want to monitor it, and we always want to be building. Fluency rates are supposed to go up, 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 up. And you can do an easy Google for what the expectation is for third grade, fourth grade, fifth, 12th grade, or whatever, and their fluency. So you could check that out so that you at least know, okay, where is he or she supposed to be, knowing that every kid's different, but we'll still give you the standard of where a child at your child's grade level generally is. And then you can ask the school to run what's called a fluency probe. That doesn't even need to be part of this. They could do easy fluency probes. They're quick, easy. It's like 60 seconds, and they look to see how many words they're reading per minute. And then bump it. You always want to keep growing. And then the language and communication. There's a direct correlation between communication and language processing and achievement and intellect. It's like that's why I am only putting these 3 areas on here. There's a lot of other areas that you could evaluate, but these are like my big 3. So we got the OWLS. So it's a listening comprehension scale. the comprehensive assessment of spoken language, referred to as the CASL. This one, and I know it's kind of small on there, but it looks for receptive language. So coming in, expressive, I'm expressing myself, articulation, so the sounds, the phonology, pragmatics, that's social language, fluency, how fluent am I able to come and get my words out, oral motor, because a lot of kids with disabilities, it's the processing, it's a motor issue. And these kids that we're talking about, they're loaded with challenges in motor coordination. So really closely examining their motoric, just the way that their brain is processing in order to do gross motor and fine motor activities. And all these muscles you have in your face. It's all motor. Voice, such as your sound quality, your breath support, and things like that. All right. So eligibility determination. So that is something that you have to have in order to get an IEP. You have to meet eligibility criteria. So that was that list of things. And like I said, most kids with dyspraxia are going to show up in that other health impaired label or eligibility. Okay. But that alone isn't enough. So yes, first you have to meet the criteria for the eligibility. So you need to look at other health impaired, what kind of kids, get determined there. But that's not just it. It's not just about a disability. You have to need special education services. If you don't need special education services, then you're not going to get an IEP. Because that's what an IEP is for. It's to give your kid services to help them, make progress. And if your kid is operating right where they should for their grade, the age, you're not going to get an IEP. If all you need for your child are accommodations, that's a 504 plan. So let's say that he or she need extra time for testing, extra time for assignments, reduced assignments even. So the same work, they just need a reduction in how much product is there for them to do. A smaller setting for tests or quizzes, a copy of notes. Those are all accommodations. You can get those on an IEP, but you could also get those on a 504 plan. But a 504 plan does not have direct services. You could get some related services, which could be like collaboration teacher to teacher, that kind of stuff. But you have to have what's called the impact of the disability to where the student needs special education in order to qualify. All right, so what if you don't agree? So what if you go to that meeting and they're like, yeah, no, we don't really think so. He's fine, she's fine. And you're making a big deal about this. First thing, you got to read your procedural safeguards. When you go to these meetings, they give you this little booklet. Well, they either give it to you, they'll give it to you in paper if you ask for it. Many school districts will automatically give it to you in paper. Some of them will send you a link to a digital copy of it. It's not really that long, but it's very legally, it's wordy, but it describes to you what rights you have. So that if you don't agree, it will guide you through the process. There's multiple different avenues that you can go. So that you have to sign it. Don't just sign it. And if you don't understand it, that's when you say, I don't want to sign this. I don't understand what this is talking about. And they are required under federal law to explain it to you. So make sure that you should never be signing things that you don't understand. You wouldn't do that when you go buy a car, when you buy a house. So you can't do that with kids' education either. Document your disagreement. So there is a space on these forms for parent input. So that's supposed to be on there. If something fluky happens and it's not on there, you leave that meeting, you immediately follow up with an email to the administration at the school, as well as whoever was running your meeting, and let them know that you were in disagreement. But on those forms, there should be a space for you to document that you did not agree. So if they kind of skip over that, then you can say, okay, wait, isn't there a place on there for me to say that I don't agree with this decision? They'll tell you what's got to happen. All right. And then, if it's like not getting you anywhere and you don't agree with the findings from that it's a psychoeducational evaluation. If you don't agree with it, you have the right to file due process to get an independent, it's called an independent educational evaluation, or IEE, at school board expense. Now, I will tell you that it's a right that you have most of the time, my experience, all the time, but I don't know if it's truly all the time, but for me it is. The school system, when a parent requests the independent, the school will say, the system will say, well, okay, but before we do that, would you give us another opportunity to evaluate again with, one of our other school psychologists? I always say yes. You do not lose your right to an independent. And oftentimes, because they don't want to pay for the private, it's expensive. So in my experience, all the time, the second one by the school system is so much better. And then you don't have to go after the independent. Now, let me also say, you're not going to get either one of those unless you have a reason. So if you just have a feeling, but that's all you have, you don't see your kid struggling, you can't say, well, he can't do this work, or he can't do that work, or she is getting hit with the ball all the time and getting hurt in school, or she's tripping and falling, she can't write, she can't use her hands, she can't use coordination between the two hands, whatever it is, you have to have a reason. Just a feeling that you have is not going to be enough, because you will be denied both the second evaluation by the school system and the independent. And you can file due process, but again, if you go into due process and you really don't have a reason, you're going to lose that too. I do a lot of due process. Most cases that are filed by parents, filing due process, they lose because they're filing due process for something they do not have a legal right to. And so and I know that gets tricky in knowing, what do I have a legal right to? But you have a legal right to what's considered a free and appropriate public education, making sure that your child's needs are all being taken into consideration and that the school provide whatever services they need in order to make meaningful progress. There was a Supreme Court case a couple years back called the Endrew case, Endrew. And the Endrew case was a family that sued the school system for, specialized programming, and they won. But in that case, even bigger than the win was where Justice Roberts said that progress that is considered de minimis progress, which is progress, but it's just a little bit of progress, should not be considered progress at all. It's not meaningful. So your kids should be making meaningful progress. So those are the things that you want to use as you advocate for whatever, an IEP, specialized services, programming, and stuff like that within your school system. Okay. All right. So you're going to obtain what's called a prior written notice. The schools might call it a PWN. And that's what gives the school's opinion. So if they're telling you, no, yeah, your kid's not going to get an IEP, or they're not going to get whatever service it is, you want to look at that prior written notice to see what are they basing this on? Because they have to document why they're refusing. And if they don't have, let's say they didn't fill out that form, you're going to say, where's my prior written notice? Because you're denying me an IEP, or like I said, whatever it is. I think far too many parents don't know about a prior written notice. You can even use that. Let's say your kid gets speech therapy at school and they come to you and they go, yeah, you know what? She doesn't really need it anymore. So we're going to go ahead and remove that. First of all, did you do an evaluation to show that? And then you want to have the prior written notice. You want to know, why is this service being removed from my child? All right. And then file due process if you need, based on FAPE. And FAPE is free and appropriate public education. And that is all built into that federal law. Okay. All right. So special education and, how it's meant to help your child. So right there, I put the code so that you can Google it if you like, the special education programs and services. And so this is the point, right? So this is all for a reason. So what's the reason? So to advance towards attaining their annual goals. So this is, let's say we have a kid who has an IEP. So they've already They have one in place. And so it's going to be to advance them towards mastering their goals. Be involved in and progress in the general education curriculum, extracurricular, and other non-academic activities. So do not let school say, oh, it's just about academics. No, right here in the statute, it tells us that it's also extracurricular and non-academic activities. So recess, the specials classes, the electives classes, those different activities that you have. Be educated and participate with non-disabled students. This is especially true in school districts that tend to take their kids with disabilities and they put them over there. So they're supposed to be providing whatever services your kid needs in the general education classroom until such time they have data and you agree that a special classroom is needed. Prepare for post-secondary education or employment. I tell high school principals all the time, they have one of two jobs for every one of their students. Kids with disabilities, kids with giftedness, whatever, I don't care. Kid that's going to go to Harvard, doesn't matter. Two things. One is to get all of their students ready for post-secondary education. So that could be college, it could be trade school, whatever. So some other type of form of education is coming after high school graduation. The other one is employment, so a job. And if your kid is not in line to do one of those two things, something is broken. And you need to talk to them and say, okay, well, we don't really know what's up with this, but we have to fix this because this is not in line with what the law tells us. Okay, so working with the school, it's a partnership. And while you have to be armed with information, you cannot. When I have parents that I'll go to a meeting with and we'll come out and they'll say, wow, my meetings never go like that. That went really well. And I'll say, yeah, okay, so that's good. And they'll say, oh, now I'm good. Now we're kind of like we're set. And I have to burst their bubble and say, well, no. And it doesn't matter who your school staff are or your teacher, it's just, you have got to know the stuff. There's never going to be people that work in the school that know your kid better than you, ever. And you really want to know a little bit more than the school staff about what your rights are, because you can very easily be taken advantage of if you don't. So you have to, if you want your kid to have a good education, you have to be involved. I'm sorry. You cannot put your kid on the bus and think it's going to all work out for the best. It's just not. Now, I will also add that, as an advocate, I don't get called when there's great situations, right? I get called when there's a problem. So I am drowning in problems. But at the same time, the situations that are working out well is because usually the parents involved and they have a good teacher. And there are going to be great teachers in your kids' education, and there's going to be years that you're like, where's June? Right? And you don't have a legal right to one type of human over another type of human. That's not a legal right that you have. They have to keep data. They have to be implementing your IEP. They don't get to not follow the IEP. And I will say that over the years, when my son would have a really great teacher, I didn't pay attention to the IEP stuff because he was making progress. He had a great teacher and things were moving along and it was wonderful. My relationship with the person was great and it was really good. And there were years where it was like, oh, well, it's going to be a long year. And it was during those years where I had to monitor the IEP. I had to have multiple meetings, making sure they were following it, that they were trained. There is part of IDEA, so the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. So it's an act, yes, it's a federal act, but it's money. So money comes from Washington under that act to the states, and then from your state Department of Education down into your school systems. So there is money attached specifically through IDEA for parent education. So you want to talk to them about where's the parent education in our school system here? Like, where's the calendar? I want to see it. I want to see what's going on. And be actively engaged and say, okay, I don't really see any training that's pertinent for me on there. And I know that I'm not alone, and talk to them about that. But also, teachers are required to receive training. So making sure that your teacher knows a little bit, at least, about your kids' needs. There's something called the day in the life, and you could look at my website. It's super easy, stacyhoagland.com. And I have a blog page on there. And I think there's a video on that page as well of me doing kind of this. And you'll see that it is a day in the life is like a 1-2 page tops. It's kind of a summation of the IEP, but it's more than that. It's a day in the life. So really describing to the teacher who your kid is, what they need, what makes them tick, how they learn best, and also your contact information. So if they have any question, they can call you, reach out to you, email you, whatever. Um, I just Teachers over the years were very appreciative to me for giving them that, and it really helped to forge our partnership because I wanted them to know that I'm expecting a lot, but I'm also willing to help out a lot as much as I can and as much as you need. So you have the development of an IEP, and that is a collaboration between both the parent and the school. That IDEA law requires parent participation. If at any point you feel like you are not able to participate because of these walls that are put up in your way, that's contrary to IDEA, and you could file due process for that. So whatever infringes upon your ability to actively participate in your kids' education is a problem. Right? So it's like for between everybody. And we have providers and families have the best knowledge, right? That's like I said before, you guys know your kids best. So their abilities, their strengths, their needs, their supports, accommodations that work. And then next steps, like your teacher, you have a third grade teacher. Your third grade teacher is focused on third grade curriculum and what typical 8-9-year-olds are sort of doing, right? But so that your kid's going to leave that class. You are going to be there through fourth grade, fifth grade, all the way up, probably into college, God willing. So, you have so much more to win or lose out of what's being done at school. And I find that sometimes where the teachers seem to be more of a hands off and, yeah, okay, you're just being over dramatic and they come up with all the stuff, is usually the teachers that are like, I can't wait till the school year's over because I get 2 months off during the summer and, I just got to get through the year. And that's not good for your kid. So you have to stay on top of things. All right. So what are some of the barriers to educational success? So old habits. We all have them. We have old habits. We have old belief systems. There's still teachers around today that think that separate, segregated classrooms over there for those kids is a better situation. It's not. It's not. I have been doing this long enough to where I have brought kids into the system at 3 years old into specialized preschool programs and watched them walk across the stage at 22 years old, if for kids who need to stay until they're 22. And everything in between. And I will tell you that the best outcome kids, when we come to that other side and they're moving on to something productive, whether it's post-secondary education or a job, or even clubs and activities that they do as adults, it's because the kids were included with typically developing peers in school for as much time as was appropriate. We have kids who need special education, but that doesn't mean that they have to be separated all the time, just for what they need. The question is always, special education is not a place. Not. It's a service. So your kid's supposed to get their service and then be back in regular with everybody else. Of course, the biggest challenge is when we talk about inclusion is behavior, because sometimes we really need to be we have to specifically attack, if you will, a behavior so that when the child is in the regular setting, they're able to function in that setting. And for some kids, that's hard. But for every other kid, and I have kids with all kinds of disabilities, very complex needs, G-tubes, respirators, ventilators, wheelchairs, whatever. It doesn't really matter what it is. It's just their greatest experience is in a regular setting. Okay. Training of staff, making sure that your teachers are trained. Inclusion training for teachers so that they know, okay, when the kids in my classroom, how do I incorporate them into my lessons? How do I meet their needs in my classroom? What do I need to know about dyspraxia that is going to help a student? And let me just add that when teachers are trained on dyspraxia or DCD, they become a better teacher for all of their students, hands down. The days of walking into a classroom and seeing like one kid with a disability, it's long. It's long gone. Our classrooms are filled with kids with special needs, whether it is could be hyperactivity. Learning disabilities are huge right now, and of course we have exponential growth in autism. So we've got all types of learning styles in every single classroom. So the more information the teachers have, the better they're going to be for all of their students. Growing number of students, demands of testing. Yes, we have testing everywhere. Kids are always tested. And I just cringe when I see at these IEP meetings where everything is about test scores. Kids with disabilities generally don't do great on tests. Doesn't matter what kind of test it is. It could be the IQ test. It could be your standard, your state standardized test. They typically don't do well. And so we don't want our kids to not receive the education that they should because those around them are assuming that, well, this kid's really not going to pass that test. So should I really spend this much information or spend this much time on them? And the last one there, I have perceived shortfall of dollars. And I put perceived because often when I file due process, we are seeking what's called compensatory education, which is tutoring. Costs a lot of money. When a school has dropped the ball and the kid has not received an appropriate education, when their IEP was not implemented, there's all kinds of other different things. But the parent will seek compensatory services for all those services that were not in place. When that happens, there's no discussion at those due process meetings about money because that would be illegal. We talk about what the kid needs, what they didn't get, what they should be getting, and what they're going to get. And so that's the whole money thing. That is internal. Certainly, I think that principals tell their staff, you don't have any money, remember the budget. So I do think that they're saying that. But I'm also saying that there is money and the schools are not allowed, it is illegal to say that we cannot provide a service to a kid because of money. Okay. So if somebody says something to you that, well, there's no money in the budget for that, you could simply say, I don't really think it's legal for you to say that to me. And they usually change their tune. All right. So what's advocacy? Providing necessary tools for appropriate decisions. So making sure that you guys have the information that you need. Informing parents of your rights. So you got to know those procedural safeguards. Building confidence. I skipped one, sorry. Helping parents help themselves, right? So again, providing the information that you guys need so that you can be advocates for your kids. You should not need somebody like me. You should not need an outside advocate. You should be able to attend these meetings with the information that you need and be able to make good decisions for your kids. Again, I don't care how much you pay a private advocate. Nobody is ever going to speak on behalf of your child like you. So I just encourage you to get more information so that you can go there on your own. Now, I understand that there are some people that don't really think that they can do it. My opinion is that a good outside advocate will come to a meeting and model for you so that you don't need them the next time. You should not have, you should not need an advocate with you all the time. And I think that if you learn what you need to learn, that you are your child's advocate. So that's advocacy is really getting information so you can do that. Building confidence so the parents are able to help others. We want you guys to kind of branch out and multiply, be able to help each other. And, take a friend with you. I even will go to several meetings where the mom brings the neighbor, her sister, her cousin, her friend, a therapist. And so that's always, I think, really beneficial as well. And somebody who knows your kid's disability and has seen them like maybe outside of school to see, okay, how does this kid disability affect them? Those are really good people to bring. Lobbying for necessary changes and legislation. So while I was, because I did this same training, I did it live, and actually the DCD, dyspraxia.com, they told us that they are actually working on a few bills because I shared my opinion was that um, these kids are under-identified, under-recognized, and I think a great part of that is because they don't. Remember that list I showed you? There was no dyspraxia on that list of eligibilities. And I do not think that we will do a good job at being able to encompass the needs of these students by continuing to throw them into that OHI. And that, when you're going to change a federal law, so it's IDEA, when you change that, you have, that's federal, that's not your state. Most rights fall in the states, and this is like as a whole. So Washington and Congress, I think most Americans think that they actually have more power than they do. But when you're going to change a federal law, you need the federal people to do it. So reaching out to members of Congress. So I was told, like I said, the DCD, dyspraxia.com folks, they are working on legislation. So I encourage you to hook up with them and to brainstorm with them, be part of that. They do have a couple pieces of legislation. So you guys need to know what those are and how you can help. You don't have to go to Washington to help. Your Congress members, your senators, so there's different levels, right? So we have each of your states, you have a House member, you have a House of Representatives, and you have a Senate in your state. Okay. And then you also have people that go to Washington to go to work. So those are members of Congress, that's the House of Representatives, and then you have the Senate in Washington. The people who you send to Washington are not the same as your people who work in your state capital. And there are certain things that you're going to go to the people in Washington for, like a federal bill, which is what the IDEA is. So I encourage you to reach out to your member of Congress, talk to them, tell them what you think. We'll hook up with the organization that's really spearheading. And I think you guys could, I think that if you guys could get added to that list, so much more will open up for you. But that's got to happen. Organizing for change. Again, working with others to make good things happen. Coming together for mutual support and action and ensuring that rights protected by law are upheld. So like I said, you can't just have a law, but you have to, people break laws all the time. When you, I don't know, yesterday, when it was Sunday or whatever day it was for you yesterday, and you were running around town, did you drive the speed limit all the time? Did you come to a complete stop at every stop sign? Most of us break those every once in a while. So it's the same thing with educational law. Those laws get broken all the time. So you want to understand what you need to do to make sure that the law is upheld for the education of your kid. All right, so what advocacy is not? It's big fat no whining, because just whining and whining to each other and complaining, but not doing anything, that's not advocacy. So it's not reinforcing feelings of helplessness and dependence. Oh, poor me, I don't know what to do. I don't know. Remaining in the dark about your rights. If you want good things to happen, you have to come out of the dark. You have to speak up. I'm sorry. You're not going to be able to hang out in the wings until somebody else makes things better. It doesn't work that way. Complaining to other parents about what needs are being met or what not being met. So sitting in the carpool line complaining to other parents, I can't believe what she said, my kid's not getting any education in this school. And y'all can sit out there and agree with each other, but that's not going to change anything. That's not advocacy, that's just commiserating. Accepting excuses for unavailability of services or funds. So, oh, I understand, yeah, you don't have enough money. Oh, okay, well, it is what it is. No, it's not. It's not what it is. There are many kids out there who are getting a really good public education. It does happen. It happened with my son. He went all the way through the public school system, and I knew my rights. And certainly I had most years he had really good teachers. There were a few that were a little bumpy, but I did what y'all should do. I went in and I met with administration. I talked to people. Sometimes those ookie teachers changed. We put them in different classes. But let me just add, it was never me that said, I want another teacher. It was me who went in with whatever my concerns were. And when the principal would say, well, what would you like me to do? I would say, you know what? I don't know. And this is your school, so I'm going to just leave it for you. So you decide what you think you need to do, and then you let me know because I knew I did not have the right to pick one teacher over another. And I there have been years in school where literally they would say to me before the school year even started, they would say, "Oh, well, I was thinking about this teacher or that teacher. What do you think?" I would offer my input, but that's a trap that you need to stay away from. Unless you're the teacher in the school, it is not your job and your responsibility to dictate which curriculum is used, which teacher choice, because let me tell you, if you choose it and it doesn't work, they will spin it on you and let you know, well, yeah, it's not working. You picked it and we gave you what you wanted. So you got to be really cautious of that. Seeking individual solutions to systemic problems. So if it's a systemic problem, it should be addressed as a systemic problem and try to stay away from, just this one kid kind of issue. All right, so to wrap it up, just a couple of things here about advocacy. So you want to advocate to see the data, data. Your team, your IEP team, or if it's not even you have a kid who doesn't have an IEP. Let's just say that your kid, they're having these discussions about does your kid qualify for an IEP? Where's the data to support their progress or their lack of progress? Where is it? I want to see it. Teacher observation is not data. That is someone's opinion, personal opinion. So it's nice. You can hear it, but that's not data and should be not be confused as data. Advocate that your child's individual needs drive the services in the placement, not the school's available programming. Now, let me add, though, that if your kid needed a specialized program, so we'll just say emotional behavior disability. So there are self-contained classrooms that are for kids with emotional behavior disability, but it's not in every school. So if your kid needed that closed program classroom and it's at the school across town, it's not the one that's down the street, your school could say, well, we don't provide that here at the ABC school, but that one down over there does. So we're going to transfer him over there. That, yes. But most of what you guys that are listening to this from the Dyspraxia organization, your kids' needs should be able to be met right at their home school. Okay. Advocate that assessments be performed as often as needed. Somebody had asked me during the live of how often should I request data and assessment. So I kind of threw out some ideas, but really you should be getting every 9 weeks, you should get a report card every 9 weeks. If your kid has an IEP, they should be getting a progress report, letting you know how they're doing on their goals. So you could ask for it every 9 weeks because technically they're supposed to be keeping data that they use to do your progress report. I find that most of the time they're not keeping data. So what I always did for my son is I let the teacher know in advance, I'm going to want to see data, just giving you a heads up. And we can take a look at it every 9 weeks, or if things are going really well, like twice a year. What I was going to be looking to see was he making progress. Because, that definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing and expect a different result. So if you, for instance, a curriculum, not every curriculum is going to work for every kid. And even if it's kids with dyspraxia, not every curriculum is going to work for every kid. And how do you know if a curriculum is working or not? Data. outcomes, assessments, where are they at? Are they making progress? Are they not? So if you're only reviewing it once a year, you just wasted a whole year. They were using that curriculum, they didn't do anything, and here you are at the end of the year, and what do you got? You can't get back time. So you have to be asking, I want to see the data. And sometimes I wouldn't even look at the data because I felt like he was making progress, so I wouldn't even ask. But the teachers always thought that I would. And that was, I think, twofold. So yes, they kept the data then, but they also, frankly, worked harder because every teacher wants kids to make progress. They want to be able to report back to the parent that your kid's making progress. And so it kind of put in their minds that she's going to want to see the data. So it was worked out good for me. Um, Advocate for real measures that ensure meaningful progress. Again, not just maybe progress, but actually meaningful progress. And I do not care what type of disability, that is irrelevant to me. All kids can make meaningful progress. Everyone. So just got to track it. Advocate to have meaningful input into the creation of the plan where concerns are turned into goals. Again, it is a requirement under federal law that you are an active member and participant during your child's education. If you do not feel like your voice is heard, you don't have enough time for meetings or whatever it is, like they don't give you enough time. You come in and they go, we have 30 minutes. And you're thinking, well, that's not going to do anything. I need an hour, 2 hours. I mean, most IEPs I go to, you're looking at 2 to 3 hours. So, and I know this, I know the system, I know the computer system that we use for IEPs, and it still takes a while. If you're going to do a good comprehensive IEP, it's not going to get done in 30 minutes. There's no way. And like I said, I know this stuff. And even for me, you can't, you do your kid an injustice if it's a 30-minute meeting. So if that's what you're getting, you could document in the parent input section. My meetings go too fast. It doesn't give me enough time to participate, and guaranteed they're going to slow things down. You're going to advocate for performance, the delays to be addressed in the IEP and therefore through daily instruction. So how are you guys going to do something different this year? What's it going to look like this year? Advocate for self-advocacy goals. And I put in there even from preschool, and what self-advocacy looks like at preschool is basically just the kid asking for help. It can be learning how to raise their hand, let others know when they need assistance, let others know when it's just too hard. And then all the way up, because really you want kids at the high school level, they should be sitting in their IEP meetings, because a lot of these kids that we're talking about, they have college potential. When they get to college, they have to be able to go to the Office of Disabilities and advocate for themselves so that they get the accommodations they need. I will also add that my son went to college, and I think he got better accommodations in college than he got in high school. So there are really good opportunities out there, and it's growing, growing, growing across the nation when it comes to supports in our colleges. So don't underestimate your kids. They could do some pretty cool stuff. Advocate for challenging goals. They shouldn't be these mundane goals, and you definitely shouldn't have the same goal year to year. Goals are supposed to be written for a year, meaning we should write a goal today that's going to be mastered in a year. You need to look at, if you have an IEP year to year, like every IEP I look at, where's last year's? I want to see last year's IEP. And I word for word, I go and I compare the two, the present level of performance and the goals. You should not see the same goals. You should see growth. If you don't see growth and you see the same goals, you have a big problem that needs to be addressed. And the goals need to be challenging. You need to get in there and get in the weeds. And if they're not mastering, again, the question is, what were you guys doing? Like, what curriculum are you using? And you can see it. If if the school says to you that they're using, I don't know, reading milestones, for instance, it's a special ed reading curriculum, and your kid's not making progress, and you don't know what reading milestones is, ask to see it. Go and have a parent-teacher meeting and look at it, because you might be able to see it and go, oh, I see why he's not making progress with this, and you give your input. So you want to be able to talk to them about that, but you have to be knowledgeable, at least know like what are they giving him or her. Advocate for professionals to join you in viewing your child through a realistic lens that accurately measures his or her performance compared to typical age peers. A lot of times, especially with special educators, they're comparing your kid to other kids with disabilities. That's not what we should do, right? Their life after school should not be a segregated workplace or a segregated school. It should be life with everyone else. And so they need to be held on their own, but really looking at what are the expectations for this grade level. You can go onto your Department of Education website and it will very clearly, you have to dig around sometimes, but you will find your state standards. It's split up from grade level to grade level. And you can decide on which ones you want to really target and talk to your school about the goals that the different, well, it's not going to write goals for you, but on there we'll give the state standards. And so you can look at the standards and go, okay, I really think we need to work on this. And, math is tricky because math builds on itself, right? Remember when you were in school? So if you didn't have the foundations in math, when you get up to this math, you're going to drown. You're just going to drown. So sometimes, especially with math, you have to really get in there and shore up the foundation before you move on. So it gets a little trickier with math. I mean, reading too, you got to be able to read, right? If you don't have decoding skills and you don't have fluency skills, you got to work on that. And there are curriculum out there for that. So you want to just keep that in mind. All right, and that's me. So that's my website there, stacyhoagland.com. And you'll be able to find, there's a blog on there. There on several of those blog posts, you will see where I have video companions to it. See that. I also have a YouTube channel, so you can look at that. I try to get all the videos up on there. You can email me. Let me unshare. And so I think in general, if I find what is the most productive is when parents know their rights. You have to understand your rights. There are a variety of resources out there. One is rightslaw.com. It's a WRIGHTS law. Pete and Pam Wright run that. They're wonderful. If you ever get the opportunity to go to one of their, it's kind of as a conference, but it's more like training sessions. They're really good. They really break down laws, and they're long, and it's not like this. It's not a quick shoot it out and get it done. It's a lot. But if you're really looking to really build on your advocacy skills, they're really good. And then you could look into your state. Again, how is your state using the money that they're getting from Washington on parent education? And, participate in those as much as possible. Get with the DCD dyspraxia folks and see what are they working on legislatively in Washington and become a part of that. It will make things better for you if Washington changes that law. But if they don't freak out. Your kid, they have a disability and they have an impact of their disability on their education. The school is required to do what? Child find, right? Find your kid. They are required to do that. And so you should be able to get what your kid needs. I know that oftentimes one of the biggest challenges for kids with dyspraxia, you don't even get to the IEP woes because you can't get an IEP. So again, they have to have a disability and they have to have a need for special education. So be thinking forward to be thinking, all right, what special education service does my kid need? So there's, like I said before, there's the therapies, right? The OT, PT, speech therapy, there's counseling and all that stuff. So those are related services though, okay? So the main services are going to be things like specialized instruction in reading, specialized instruction in math, specialized instruction in all the things. Intensive instruction, there's collaboration where teachers are collaborating with teachers. That could be a whole training in itself. But so just check these different groups out that I suggested. I think you will find some good resources there. Follow DCD Dyspraxia on Facebook. They do a pretty good job at posting, things that they have coming up there. So connect with them And if you need something, you can contact me. But I wish you guys lots of luck. And just remember that the schools are required, no matter who your kid is, for them to make meaningful progress. So again, look at the data. If they're not making meaningful progress, it's time to set a meeting. You need to talk to them and ask them, what are you guys doing to help my kid make progress, meaningful progress? And if it's the same thing that was done last year, then again, that's the definition of insanity. And ask them what they could do different this year that's actually going to make a difference. All right. Okay. It was good to be here with you guys. Take care.